Podcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome to the July Community IT Innovators webinar. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar on nonprofit cybersecurity readiness. My name is Johan Hammerstrom, and I'm the CEO of Community IT and the moderator of our webinar series. Before we begin, I'd like to tell you a little bit more about our company. Community IT is a 100% employee-owned company, and our team of almost 40 staff is dedicated to helping nonprofit organizations advance their missions through the effective use of technology. We're technology experts, and we have been consistently named a top 500 managed service provider by Channel Futures. And now it's my pleasure to introduce today's presenter, our Chief Technology Officer, Matthew Eshleman. Hello, Matt.
Hey, Johan, thanks for the introduction, and thanks everyone for taking time out of your day to join this webinar where we're going to be talking about nonprofit cybersecurity risk assessments and specifically the NIST framework. It's good to be with everybody today. I was checking my calendar, and so it's actually been about 20 years this month that I joined Community IT as an intern. And it's been a great journey with this company, kind of playing all the different roles and really getting to know nonprofits and the unique needs that nonprofit organizations have around technology, and in the last several years, specifically around cybersecurity. So I'm thankful for this opportunity to talk with you today. I'd invite you to ask questions using the chat. So Johan will be moderating that as we go along. And we'll be making this interactive. We will have some time for questions at the end, but please don't wait until the end to chat in into your questions. So we've got a lot of content to cover today, so I'm going to go ahead and get right into it. So the agenda for our conversation this afternoon is going to cover a couple of different areas. First, I'd like to just start off by helping to set the groundwork for the cybersecurity landscape that we operate in. I think it's new and different and changing, and especially in kind of our current context. There's a lot of things that we need to understand about the world that we operate in from a cyber standpoint. We'll talk about the risk assessment portion specifically and spend most of our time there. We'll talk a little bit about budgeting for risk prevention and some of the tools and techniques that are available for organizations, and look at some of the specific budget numbers that you can put into your organization's budget. We'll talk about how to engage executives. If you're an executive and you're on this meeting, great, congratulations. If you're somebody who's responsible for cybersecurity at your organization, there may be some tips or tools that you can take away in terms of engaging with your executives, or if you've got a great relationship with your executive leadership at your organization, please feel free to chat that in as well. And then finally, after we engage with executives, we can talk a little bit about roadmap for implementing some of those controls. Before we go too much further, I do want to get a sense of the audience that is here today, and just understand for who's responsible for cybersecurity in your organization. So go ahead and chat that in or respond to the poll there. Is it you? Do you have an internal IT department? Does that follow under operations? Maybe no one's responsible for it, or perhaps you've outsourced that to an MSP, a managed service provider, or maybe we should have included another acronym to include a MSSP, or a managed security services provider. So go ahead, we'll leave that open for just a few more seconds, and thanks to everybody for participating with that. Okay, it seems like most folks on the webinar have maybe outsourced that to a managed services provider, and I think that's a good option. Certainly as a managed service provider ourselves, we have a lot of tools and capabilities in that area, and as we'll see, the security controls can be rather complicated, require a lot of update and maintenance, and so outsourcing it can be can be a good option. I think for those folks that are saying no one, hopefully you can get some takeaways and maybe get some better understanding of where to put that responsibility and hopefully implement some of those controls as well. So starting off, I think it's helpful for us to understand the cybersecurity landscape, kind of the world that we're living in on a cyber perspective, and understand that there are persistent and ongoing brute force attacks on your online digital identity. Sometimes, we look at this from kind of a two-sided approach. So we're concerned about securing people's digital identity, so the kind of the username and passwords that people use to access systems, and then we're also concerned about securing the devices. So, we see from the monitoring tools that we have that there are persistent and ongoing brute force attacks on those identities. Again, so if you're in Google, if you're in Office 365, if you're in Dropbox, if you're in Box, if you're in any platform that can be accessed from the web, in addition to you accessing your platform, lots of other bad guys are trying to access your platform as well. And so they're leveraging, those massive password database breaches that occur, and they're just trying to log in all the time against that online identity. We're also seeing sophisticated spear phishing attempts. I saw from the information submitted by people in the registration that this was a common threat that they saw, particularly targeted towards executive leadership at the staff. Those emails that kind of slip through the spam filters that appear to be the executive talking to a finance associate, an operations person talking to one of their assistants to kind of get them to call to action, like, hey, can you do this? Can you take this action? Can you review this email? Can you process this, buy this gift card? Can you update this wire transfer? And that's really sophisticated and has come a long way. And we'll see a little bit further on in the incident report data that we have that this is a trend that we have seen a big increase going from in 2018 and then into 2019. We're also seeing organizations targeted because of the work that they do. So that certainly applies to us as a managed service provider. So the US CERT issued an advisory saying, hey, as a managed service provider, you're a target by nation state actors because we have access to a lot of privileged information of our clients. And so we take a lot of care to protect that data. So we know we're a target. Organizations, I think, especially coming into an election cycle, we certainly are aware of disinformation campaigns, of campaigns against those accounts for people working on federal campaigns or kind of other election campaigns. They're targeted, and so if you're in that space, you can kind of expect to have your account targeted based on the work that you do. There certainly could be other organizations that are also targeted. We see it from our perspective, a lot of organizations that are working on policy, good governance, journalism. Those sectors tend to be targeted by sophisticated attacks because the actors that are out there are interested in the content that they're producing and kind of who they're talking to and kind of how that information is being disseminated. So again, depending on the organization that you're in, you may have an additional layer of risk just because of the work that you do. And again, attacks targeting vendors. So again, in our connected world, you may have data in one system, that vendor may be using a subcontractor or another system. So the web of your connections can be rather extensive, and all of those vendors are targets. And so it's important to understand the data that you have, the systems that data resides in, and kind of which vendors are accessing it or have access to that. So if there's a breach in a subcontractor, that may expose your data. So again, it's important to understand where your data lives and who has access to it. It's not all necessarily bad news. I think there's a lot of great security tools that are available to combat these new threats, and we'll talk a little bit about that during this webinar. But there are great security tools that are being developed to combat the threats, and in general, they are fairly affordable. I think it's also great that organizations are starting to ask about where to start to improve their cybersecurity. Now that we're halfway through 2020, I mean, maybe it feels like a lifetime through 2020, but organizations are starting to take a proactive stance about cybersecurity, and not just because they want to have better security controls, but because they think, it's the right thing to do, because they're seeing maybe external compliance pressure, or membership organizations, including cyber controls as part of what it means to have a gold star from their organization. But it is starting to be a proactive approach that we see as an organization, as opposed to just something that, we as a managed service provider, are kind of constantly reminding our clients. So I think that's good. There's still a long way to go. According to, I think this is the Microsoft nonprofit cybersecurity report that they put out about 2 years ago, 68% of nonprofits still didn't have an incident response plan. And so that would be a plan for what to do, when an organization's data is compromised. So again, that's a big gap that needs to be addressed. And cybersecurity threats are real, and they have real costs, even for small organizations. I think we tend to get blinded by, the big numbers associated with data breaches of, massive companies, in the hundreds, millions of dollars. And so we, smaller organizations kind of tend to dismiss that. But we see from data from some organizations that do reporting on small and mid-sized businesses, that, the breach response for a small to medium business is about $149,000. And so that's like direct out-of-pocket cost. That is not, counting lost staff time, or lost productivity, or lost donations, or lost services. It's, that's direct cost. That's paying for lawyers, that's paying for media, that's, paying to remediate the damages. So again, cybersecurity breaches, even for a small to mid-sized organization, can be substantial. We tend to view cybersecurity, through kind of a lens, and it helps us to organize our thoughts. And this is the lens that we approach cybersecurity at Community IT. So it's not just a technology solution. This is something that's rooted in policy, to help, what's important to the organization, how is that defined. So if we can start with that foundation of security policy, then you can build the appropriate tools and processes on place on top of that. So on top of security policy, we really want to look at training the users in security awareness, so that you've got an educated and aware staff. We'll see this come up in the NIST framework. User training is a big element, because it's an effective control, and it's relatively affordable as well. Building on top of that, then we get into some technology controls, like, protecting the identity, data protection, device management, looking at your perimeter firewall. Again, in today's, primarily remote work environment, certainly the network perimeter is very expansive, or maybe doesn't even exist at all. And then we also look at controls and protections around web-based applications. And then finally, looking at some next-gen tools to layer on top of that, once all the bases are covered. So again, just a helpful framework, building on a foundation of policy. So as I mentioned, we support about 140 different nonprofit organizations. We're primarily based here in the DC metro area, and that represents about 5,000 seats. So we see a lot of ticket data, we see a lot of incident information, and over the last couple of years, we've started to kind of compile that and report it back out, as a resource to help inform nonprofit organizations to say, hey, what are the threats that are facing other organizations that look like me? And so this is a summary from our nonprofit incident report. And so we did a webinar back, I think, in April on that. And so Johan can chat that link out if you want to reference that. So that looks at the data that we see from our clients. And then we report out on the different types of security incidents that our clients experience. And so you can see here, perhaps no big surprise that spam, is kind of the most common threat. We still see some malware. Most of that tends to be, pop-ups and kind of unwanted things like that, which is a little bit different than viruses, perhaps a more malicious form of malware. We're seeing a significant amount of account compromise. meaning somebody's online digital identity was accessed by someone other than themselves. And then the other kind of big category is around business email compromise, again, so a much more sophisticated type. You might also see it referred to as spear phishing. So those are the kind of common threats that we see facing organizations. And so that actually helps inform some of the security controls that we invest in and kind of recommend organizations invest in, knowing what are the types of threats that, peer groups are facing, how can we best combat, those threats. Since we've been doing this for a couple of years, we've now started to generate some comparative data, so we can see that spam, is a big increase. I think it's probably doesn't reflect that there's more spam out there. I think it's reflective of we've done a better job educating our clients to say, hey, if you see something suspicious, send it in to us. Again, this is an area where an ounce of prevention is certainly worth a pound of cure, and so we can prevent somebody from clicking on a malicious link. That's going to be a lot more effective than trying to make sure we've got technology tools in place to block it or clean it up after it's happened. The big thing you see here that I think is impactful is the big increase in spear phishing from the data that we saw in 2018 compared to 2019. So again, a lot of spear phishing came in on the scene in 2019, and there's some technology tools in place to combat that. So I think those are the big takeaways. Also see that account compromise is on here. Again, it's we've had a decrease going in 2018 to 2019, and I will make a pitch here, and you'll hear it later. For organizations that have implemented multi-factor authentication, they aren't reflected in this number. This is organizations that have not turned on multi-factor authentication, are much more susceptible to account compromise than organizations that have turned on multi-factor authentication for all of their cloud services. So again, the trends, we are seeing, in general, cybersecurity incidents are on the rise, and I would say that certainly continued here in through 2020. We've mirrored, I think, the broader, kind of the broader organizational marketplace where, a lot of spear phishing and kind of general attacks were centered around remote work and kind of the COVID response. And so, there was lots and lots of, spear phishing around that, vector. Spam continues to be a problem. I don't think it's going away. So that continues to be a problem. And I would say business email compromise, so again, that spear phishing. So not just, the generic, Viagra ads that may be considered spam, but the emails that come in that appear to be from your executive director, appear to be from your finance person, that ask you to kind of do something, to buy the gift card, to transfer money. That is the biggest headache. And so we probably get more, kind of more hours spent responding to that because it generates such a reaction among staff. So again, that's, I think, a real big pain point for organizations. And thankfully, there are some technology controls, that can help to combat that. And then finally, I'd say, account compromise is still at a high level. We had a reduction from 2018 to 2019, so that's great. I would say we're still responding to some account compromise incidents into this year. Again, until we get 100% compliance on multi-factor authentication, I think that's just going to be how things go for for the foreseeable future, until we can really implement some stronger controls around our online identities. So I'm going to just take a pause and do another survey. I just want to get a sense from the attendees here in terms of how confident are you, with your own organization's cybersecurity controls. Very concerned, somewhat, not at all. So I'll just give this a minute to respond here. Okay, we got most everybody responding here, and looks like perhaps an even distribution uh, between those folks. Most folks are somewhat concerned, which probably makes sense. With a quarter saying, "Hey, we're very concerned," and 22% saying, "Not at all." And so I am curious for those folks that are saying not at all concerned. Is that because you feel like your cybersecurity controls are in a really good place, and so you don't have to worry about it, or are you saying, not at all concerned because you don't really think you have any kind of data or information that's kind of interest. So I'd be curious to know a little bit more about that. So making the shift a little bit from kind of the trends and the landscape, I do want to talk a little bit now about the assessment itself. And I think the different ways that organizations can go about, kind of understanding what's in place now, what they should do next, how much should they budget, kind of answering those questions. So what you see up on your screen here is kind of a summary of some of the different options that we have at Community IT. So today we're going to look specifically at the NIST Cybersecurity Framework Survey. And so that's, a survey-based approach. It's relatively low effort, about an hour time investment. It doesn't look at your network. It doesn't evaluate any configurations. It's simply a survey that walks you through all the different NIST controls and generates a report again. So it's a great way to just kind of get started. It's a really nice tool, but it doesn't take much time, and it's requires you to just fill out some information about your organization, how what controls you've implemented, and it'll generate a report from there. Kind of the step up from that, we have what's called a core assessment. That's a more detailed discovery than the NIST assessment. Instead of just looking at the roadmap, that's a process that involves, interviewing staff, looking at your existing process and controls, evaluating the existing security policies, taking a look at the security configurations that are in place, and mapping out a high-level roadmap for what to improve. So again, that takes about 20 hours of time, and is a good kind of step in the water if you know that you've done some basics, but you really want to kind of understand what your next steps are. We also have what we have titled a comprehensive assessment, and that again, you see, instead of it being a 20-hour kind of survey, configuration, is more on the the order of like 80 to 100 hours. This is again geared towards organizations that are probably 100 and 150 staff and up, and is a much more detailed assessment, looking at the detailed discovery process, evaluating kind of all aspects of people, process, and technology aspects of cybersecurity, and then developing a comprehensive roadmap to kind of take from there. And then the final piece that we also hear clients interested in is what's called a penetration test. So a penetration test, and I wanted to add this in here. So we don't do the penetration tests ourselves. We have a third-party vendor that we partner with to do the penetration tests, but those are really focused on kind of simulating an adversary attacking the network. So again, where our assessments, we're going to be in your network, working alongside of your IT teams, having back and forth. The penetration test is kind of a black box test where they're going to put a device on your network, they're going to be scanning, they're going to be doing external testing, they're going to be probing, and kind of trying to simulate what an attacker is already doing on your network. It tends to be very technical in nature, focused on those technology weaknesses and vulnerabilities, and kind of generates a very comprehensive list of technology related systems that would need to be upgraded or improved, and those tend to be kind of in the order of $20,000 solution on up. So again, that that may be necessary for organizations to complete a penetration test, but unless you've already invested a lot in security controls, you may not get the most value from a $20,000 test to tell you to implement some of the basics. So again, depending where you're at in the maturity of your organization, the NIST survey may be a great place for you to start, or you may need to invest a little bit more to get your security aligned to where it needs to be. So specifically on the survey, I did want to talk about kind of what is NIST and what does it kind of what does it do. So the NIST cybersecurity framework, so that NIST CSF stands for the National Institute of Standards and Technology, so that's NIST. That was founded in 1901, and it's part of the U.S. Department of Commerce. So this is your tax dollars at work. And so it's focused on developing as the name would imply, standards and technologies for for industry and for institutions to use. So again, their NIST is smart electric power grid and electronic health records, computer chips, kind of all this stuff is kind of rooted in NIST standards. So they put out this standard. It's called NIST 800.53. It's specifically developed for federal agencies and kind of related contractors to make sure their cybersecurity controls are in a good place. You can download it yourself, right? This is a freely available resource, and it's essentially turns into like a almost 1,700 line spreadsheet of controls. So again, pretty massive list of controls, not really designed for a 50-person nonprofit organization to to kind of go through. It's just contains lots of irrelevant information for organizations that have outsourced a lot of their technology, don't have a lot of resources, aren't doing development, all of that kind of stuff. So the NIST survey that we have access to basically distills down those 1,700 controls into a much more digestible format that's included in the survey. So again, we're now talking about answering 75 questions instead of 1,600, and then they're organized into these 5 domains that you see here. So again, the NIST cybersecurity framework breaks things into these 5 domains, which is identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. So again, these are familiar controls that you'll see in some other frameworks as well. But this idea that you've got kind of a life cycle of understanding the assets that you have, what are the IT governance decisions you need to make, what's your overall risk assessment as an organization, how do you protect those assets, how are you detecting whenever vulnerabilities or issues may occur, what are you going to do from a response perspective, when some anomalous event happens, how are you going to mitigate that, and then finally, what are you going to do to recover, make improvements, incorporate that in your life cycle, and then communicate with the necessary stakeholders. So that's essentially the NIST cybersecurity framework. Takes all these 1,700 controls, distills them down under the these 5 different domains, and then kind of looks at all these different areas. So the NIST survey will generate a risk map that will surface the deficiencies that you have in your organization, or perhaps where your organization is doing well at, as a way to provide some information for reporting, so you can have a visualization of what's working well and what needs improvement. So access to the online tool provides this, and in addition to the risk map, there's also a prioritized list of recommendations. So again, this is the the element of the report that connects the recommendation back to the security standard. So again, PR, stand for protect, and then AT. So again, you can map all of these standards back to the NIST controls if that's important to you. But from a standards framework perspective, it gives us, a consistent way to assess risk and understand, what controls are helping to support which different initiatives. So again, in this sample report that we see here, we can see that it's identifying that all users are informed and trained. And again, I would say, unless your organization has implemented a security awareness training program, this will be a recommendation that, that you'll get. We see further down, again, threats both internal and external are identified. Again, unless you have a managed service partner that is, getting information from intelligence sources and their vendors and helping you understand what threats are out there and what risks your organization may face and how you're protected from them. Again, this may be a recommendation for you as well. So you can see this report will generate a list of all those critical recommendations, along with high priority recommendations as well. So I'll just pause here and ask Johan if there's any questions about the content that we've covered so far.
Not yet, but this has been great, Matt, and I think it's been very clear. And I'm going to send out a link to the NIST website, to their cybersecurity framework.
Yeah, that's great. And they, in addition to the cybersecurity framework, which you can have and download and review yourself, they also have some additional resources that you can look at in terms of training on the NIST framework to better understand kind of what they're doing and why they're doing it. So it's a great resource. Again, like I said, this is a federal government initiative, and so this is your tax dollars at work. It's free. It's available to you. And so if security is your thing, this would be something to really delve into and to kind of understand. Like I said, the NIST framework is about 1,700 lines of stuff, and so that's a lot to take in. So the NIST survey that we'll talk about how you can get access to, is a much more concise way to understand what's relevant and what's meaningful for for me as a small to mid-sized nonprofit organization. What should my security look like? And this is a great way to get a standards-based report. It's not just what did community IT make up, but it's what's NIST, what are they doing, and what's relevant for small to mid-sized organizations. All right, so as we transition from the survey itself and then pivot into getting started with implementing some of the cybersecurity controls, I do want to get a sense from folks on the meeting here today is, do you have a plan to improve cybersecurity at your organization? So again, we just get a sense of, where are folks at with improving the cybersecurity controls at your organization? Great, I'm glad to see everybody filling the answer. If you can just take a second and vote, we'll get those results up here for everybody else to see. Okay, and yeah, it does seem like most people on the webinar today do have some controls that are underway, so that's really great to see. And smaller percentages that say not yet. So hopefully, if you're in that 20% that are saying not yet, you can get some specific takeaways. And for those folks that are underway, there may be some recommendations that either are new or you get some additional context to help move those forward. So in terms of getting started with cybersecurity, I did want to highlight these are kind of our foundational cybersecurity controls that we have in place at Community IT, and so like I said, that starts with IT policy, building with cybersecurity awareness training, recognizing that operating system and third-party updates are a really critical element of cybersecurity, and so covering the bases, antivirus and backups, those are kind of the oldies but goodies. And even now this month, we see that Microsoft has released a security patch for a rather significant vulnerability in Windows Server related to DNS. So having a policy and a process and a mechanism in place for doing updates, making sure they're installed, reporting on them is a key element of cybersecurity. And then we round out our kind of core cybersecurity controls with multi-factor authentication and then business email compromise. So like I said, from the data that we see of our clients, this is a major pain point, and it's something that's growing in prominence. And based on kind of the risk that it represents to the organization, that's why we added this in as part of a core recommendation. If you're getting started with cybersecurity, these should be the things that you can check off to make sure that you've got a good foundation. If that seems like a long list and you're kind of just getting started, I think it's important for organizations to basically implement these three things. Like if you do, kind of nothing else, implementing multi-factor authentication, putting in place a security awareness training program, and then actually adding some business email compromise protection tool into your list of systems that you're using really does pay benefits, and it provides protection against kind of the most common threats that we see facing organizations. So with multi-factor authentication, again, that combines something which is your password, with something you have, which is your device, most often, so a smartphone, that is able to generate a unique code to help complete the login process. So when a hacker gets your password, they're not able to get into your account because they also would need to have your device as well. So that's a very effective way of blocking that. So again, multi-factor authentication is included with most cloud applications. So again, with Office 365, with G Suite, Box, Dropbox, all of those should include multi-factor authentication as part of their base package. Specifically for Office 365, you can add on some additional security bundles to give you some more sophisticated controls. So if you add in EMS, so the Enterprise Mobility and Security, I think that's $220 per SKU for nonprofits. You can upgrade that to include conditional access, meaning that you can apply different rules or policies to grant or block access depending on where a user is or what device they're accessing, trying to access the system from. So that can be powerful. So again, we're starting to see more and more organizations move from kind of just this binary, if you have a username and password, log in, to looking at these conditional access policies to say, hey, we're only going to allow access from devices that we, from our organization devices, or we're only going to allow access from IP addresses that we trust, or we're going to block sign-ins from this location because we know we get a lot of, we don't work in this area, and so there's no reason anybody should be logging in. So again, conditional access can be an improved security tool just to help minimize the surface area for attack. For security awareness training, like I said, there's lots of options out there. This is an area where there's lots and lots of vendors competing. We use KnowBe4 at Community IT. I think they've got the kind of the best mix of both security awareness training and a big library of really relevant topics. And it's not just somebody talking at you for an hour, but interactive games and quizzes and videos to make that training interesting and engaging. But then they also have a really nice phishing tool that you can test your staff and see who's clicking on the links. What staff may need some extra education or training or engagement to kind of make sure that they're able to identify suspicious links or information in email. So again, KnowBe4 is the tool that we use. It's typically about $20 per user for the year for the license. So again, not very expensive and something that really provides a lot of benefit to the organization in terms of improving the overall security posture of the organization. Many cyber liability insurance policies will, there's an area to check off, like, do you have security awareness training? So this is an easy way to do that. And then the final piece here is business email compromise protection against, and so this is something that protects against that spear phishing. So not just spam, I think most folks actually can kind of ignore spam at this point. It doesn't kind of rise to the level that we see the frustration with business email compromise. The tool that we use is called Barracuda Sentinel, and in addition to blocking, doing a good job of blocking this kind of stuff that makes its way through the spam filter, it also does some additional stuff like including account takeover protection. So again, if all of a sudden we see or the system sees a login from a user account that's not in the normal location, it sends an alert. If a forwarding rule is detected, it can create alerts. So again, it can provide reporting and insight like that. And then it also will include DMARC and DKIM administration. So these are some newer tools that would supplement kind of traditional email validation schemes like SPF as a way to say, this is a valid email from this organization, as a way to help combat spoofing. So again, an effective tool, only a couple dollars per mailbox per month. So again, those would be the controls that I would focus on that provide immediate protection, kind of assuming that you already have backups in place, assuming that you already are updating your systems. But these are the three controls that I think are really important to have in place to help protect against the most common threats facing nonprofit organizations. So having all these, we've got the fancy survey, we've got a list of controls to implement. How do we kind of make that change from understanding we need to act to actually moving into action? And I think it's important, obviously, leadership has to be engaged with making these decisions. And so I think it's important, as we talked about at the beginning, these are the cybersecurity landscape. All organizations are vulnerable. Nonprofit organizations, don't get to fly under the radar because they do good work, or because they're small, or because they don't have the budget to maybe invest in cybersecurity controls. The people sitting on the other side of the computer, don't have that concern. And so again, all organizations are vulnerable. Every organization, has social security information of their staff. They may have sensitive information about donors. They may have sensitive information about patients or clients that they're working with. So all organizations, have resources that can be exploited. And poor cybersecurity is an organizational liability. Again, your organization may have reporting requirements if you have personally identifiable information. So, recognizing that, hey, just because you're a nonprofit doesn't mean, you can necessarily skip out on those controls. And it does require, leadership to say yes. I think for a lot of things, you can put in some controls and some policies and some procedures without executive buy-in, but to have a truly meaningful, cybersecurity campaign, the executive leader, needs to be, at the front of the organization saying, hey, we're making these changes because our data is important. And this is important for us as an organization to make sure that we're protecting, the information of our staff and the constituents that we support. So again, it's important, that this is a message that does come down from the top. So in terms of how to, engage your leadership, I would say it's important to schedule time for security. You can have a rhythm, such as monthly reporting and quarterly planning. Cybersecurity changes, relatively quickly. So, doing annual plans or 3-year planning or 5-year planning may not be as helpful in the context of cybersecurity. What's happening now, and planning, may be different 2 or 3 months from now. So again, you may want to decide on some monthly metrics that you want to report on, and then have a quarterly planning process to update for what's going to happen in the next quarter. I think it's also important to know your audience. What is the method of communication that's going to be the most effective for your leadership team? Do they want to know, the story of how, somebody at another organization, updated a wire transfer and transferred $50,000 to another, to a bank account? Or do they want to, have big picture metrics like, a breach is going to cost $149,000 for most small mid-sized organizations. 68% of nonprofits don't have an incident response plan. So again, understand the audience and kind of figure out the way to communicate with them. And then finally, leverage existing compliance requirements. So, if your organization processes credit card payments, you need to be concerned about PCI compliance. So again, that may be an avenue to make improvements in your cybersecurity controls. Certainly, if you are, operate in healthcare in any way, then HIPAA compliance may be the avenue to move forward some cybersecurity improvements. If you deal with data subjects from the European Union, then GDPR, maybe that's the avenue. And then finally, I would say, beyond just kind of these really big formal compliance frameworks, you may also look at, maybe your membership organizations that you're a part of. I was just working with an organization that, they don't have any of these formal compliance requirements, but, the membership organization that they're a part of was saying, hey, we're going to, issue our seal of approval, and to have the seal of approval from this, group of nonprofit organizations, we need to, understand what security controls that you have in place as your organization. So again, I think more and more organizations are starting to, incorporate cybersecurity controls, in other areas. So again, your finance audit, may now include cybersecurity controls. And so, understanding where those leverage points are. So as we kind of wrap up here, I do want to say, in terms of the next steps that that you can take, I would say, it's important to understand what existing controls that you have in place. So again, what are the things that you've already done? The next step I would say would be, let's get you access to the survey tool. So Johan's going to chat out a link where you can schedule an hour with me to go through this survey together. In the past, I've just kind of made this survey available generally, and I would say it's had less than 100% compliance. And so I think security controls and this assessment in particular are really effective, but it's only effective if you're able to go through it, understand the questions, understand the outcomes. And so I really want to make sure that organizations are able to take the information, answer all the questions, and get something out of it. So so if you click on the link, you can schedule an hour of time with me, and I will go through this assessment with you to make sure that you understand all the questions and you understand the outcomes. So again, there's no cost to that. I think security is really important to me. It's something I've been working on a lot in the last couple of years, and being able to move from a general security tool to like, hey, what are the specific steps I'm going to take at my organization is something that I want to make sure gets done. So take that opportunity to exercise that, to get the roadmap. Again, we're not going to look at the specific configurations of your network. What's your password policy? What's your backup retention schedule? But we'll walk through the survey and identify those controls that are coming out of it. And then finally, once you get that report back, it would be a good opportunity, if you haven't already, to schedule time with your organization's leadership to say, hey, we went through this NIST survey. Here are the 3 things that I identified as critical risk for, for us. How can we address them as a way to provide some specifics to move forward. So I'll pause here to see if there's any additional questions that came up during the last section or two.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you, Matt. So there was a question about cloud applications that don't support multi-factor authentication. What are some recommendations in those cases?
I think the answer is it depends, and to some extent, kind of how sophisticated that application is. In some cases, you may be able to provide what's called single sign-on access to those applications. So again, and so the multi-factor authentication would happen at your SSO provider, so your single sign-on provider, and then it's providing access to the application. So that would be one way of doing it. There's some other tools. So if you're an Office 365 or an Azure customer, Microsoft provides some really impressive tools to put some gateways in front of applications. So you can use a feature in Azure called Azure Application Gateway as a way to kind of proxy access to applications. And so you can, again, kind of use your Office 365 SSO and multi-factor authentication policies as a way to authenticate to an application and then provide secure access to it. So again, there's a couple of different ways that depending on the application that you may be able to put some controls in front of it. And again, if it's a a vendor that's maybe some custom software, I don't know that I would necessarily leave a vendor just because they don't have MFA, especially if I've been with them for a long time. But I certainly know at Community IT, every application that we use, we are putting MFA. Every application that has sensitive client data, that has to be protected by MFA for us. And so, that may be a buy or do not buy decision, if you're evaluating new solutions. So. Again, there's a couple of different ways to go about it, I think, depending on the application and what's available from the vendor themselves.
Great, thank you. And for those who are interested in scheduling a meeting with you, and we certainly encourage anyone who's interested to follow that link that I chatted out just a minute ago. Is there anything that they can do to better prepare for the meeting with you?
I think, taking a look at your existing, if you have existing IT policy or procedures, I think that would be helpful information to have available ahead of time. If you are already working with, an existing managed service provider, you could ask them for a copy of their cybersecurity controls document. So again, we have a 20-page document at Community IT that kind of outlines all the different systems we have and how we use them and what's protected and how we protect them. So your MSP should be able to provide something like that that can provide you some information on how they're protecting your system. So again, if you can get a copy of that, that would be a helpful thing to have, because it should maybe have those answers to what are some of the protections that are already in place, how are they vetting threat sources, what are they doing. So look at your existing policies. If you're already working with a vendor, get a copy of their cybersecurity controls document as a way to help have that documentation, because we're going to need to find some answers to those questions.
Great. Thank you, Matt.
Great. Thank you. I appreciate it. So I will say next month, and I forgot to put the date in. So this will be the August webinar. Our colleagues at Build Consulting will be delivering the webinar then. I think it will be August 19th.
That's correct. August 19th at, I believe it's 3 o'clock, but let me just confirm that. I'm sorry. It's going to be Wednesday, August 12th at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. You will get an email with an invitation to register for that webinar. But if you want, you can go ahead and set aside the time right now. That'll be Wednesday, August 12th at 1 o'clock Eastern time.
All right. Great. Well, thank you so much. Johan, I'll let you wrap it up.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Matt. That was great as usual. And I don't know if I actually mentioned this at the beginning, the slides and the recording will be available on our website. You'll get an email with a link to those after, probably tomorrow we'll be sending that out. Feel free to share it with anyone who was not able to attend the webinar today. We certainly enjoy offering these webinars and are grateful for all of you joining us today. So please stay safe, and we look forward to having you join us in the future. Take care.